The death penalty, which can also be referred to as capital punishment, is a sentence given to an individual by a court of law for committing a serious crime which results in their execution. For as long as there has been evidence of recorded history, there is also evidence of societies throughout the world with their own values and traditions. Alongside that, there is also recorded evidence of placing within these societies and a need to maintain social order. The death penalty was one of the main forms of punishment for people who went against their society's norms, values, traditions, or laws, and it was widely accepted throughout the world as an effective tool of maintaining social control. Death as a punishment for having committed a crime was routinely carried out across the world for centuries, and in many cases the punishment likely to be given, i.e. the death penalty, was largely out of proportion to the crime that had been committed. Most of the methods used whilst carrying out an individual sentence were gruesome and made into a public spectacle in order to help convey the message to the rest of society. Some methods included being pressed to death under heavy weights, being hung, and being torn apart by horses. For the majority of time, the death penalty was a standard form of punishment for an offender, regardless of what crime they had committed. Although over the past 200 years or so, the support from both world leaders and members of the public within societies has gradually decreased. Beccaria was one of the first thinkers to speak out against the death penalty. He acknowledged it was an inhumane way to punish people for their crimes, and it only sent a momentary message to the public, whereas a lifetime prison sentence would convey a much clearer message. On a global scale, there has been a significant decline in acceptance and support for the state using the death penalty as a means of punishing an individual for committing a crime. As there are only a small number of countries left in the world that still carry out executions, which include China, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, the trend moving towards total worldwide abolition of the death penalty is inevitable in due course. There are 141 countries worldwide that are abolitionist of the death penalty, in both law and in practice. This figure is equivalent to over two-thirds of the world's nations and includes countries such as Canada and Australia. However, within the countries that do still practice the death penalty, such as Ethiopia and Syria, Amnesty International found a rise in death penalty rates in 2016 of 1,032 executions across 23 countries compared to the 1,634 executions carried out across 25 countries in 2015. The United Nations Secretary General stated that the death penalty doesn't have a place in the 21st century, and those countries that are still doing it are going against international laws. In relation to how an individual's human rights may be affected when they are sentenced with the death penalty, Clapman states that if we are to believe that torture and inhumane punishment are prohibited, then of course an irreversible sentence to death should also be prohibited, as it should also be considered to be inhumane. It is also important to note that the death penalty directly goes against Article 30 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that no one can take your human rights away from you. In this instance of an individual being sentenced to death by a court of law, the state directly takes away that individual's human rights all at once. Beccaria acknowledges the death penalty was an inhumane form of punishment and there's little justification for the state to take a human life. In drawing towards a conclusion in determining the effectiveness of the death penalty acting as a deterrent for committing a crime, it is important to note that the arguments and ideas presented previously indicate that the death penalty is not an effective deterrent and never was. Therefore, this indicates that abolitionist perspectives are presumably the direction the death penalty is going. Generally, thinkers on this topic tend to have very similar perspectives. For example, Rodley states that the evidence is in favour of abolitionist positions, whilst Banner also argues that it is a tool used by the state to remind the public of the power they hold, should an individual in their societies break one of their laws. Beccaria highlighted that throughout history, the threat of the death penalty never worked as a deterrent, and a lifetime prison sentence would make more of an impact on society. In order to conclude this presentation, and based on all the evidence considered, an abolitionist stance on the death penalty seems to be on the rise, as it doesn't act as a deterrent for people when committing a crime, and it never has, therefore it never will.